The first thing you notice is the laughter. Not the kind that invites you in, not the kind that eases tension, but the kind that doesn't belong anywhere it's heard. It echoes down a city street already soaked in blood and neon, bouncing off broken glass and abandoned cars, too joyful for the violence it follows. In this world, power is already obscene, already unchecked, already cruel. Supes tear through crowds with smiles sculpted for cameras, corporations script morality, and survival depends on how invisible you can make yourself. Then something else arrives. Something that doesn't crave fame, approval, or control. Something that treats this brutal playground not as a stage, but as a joke it finds endlessly funny. The question is not whether this universe can handle it. The question is whether it even understands what it's looking at when the grin widens, reality bends, and consequences stop behaving the way they're supposed to. This is not a story about heroes or villains. It's about what happens when a world built on spectacle collides with something that refuses to take it seriously at all. If this kind of story pulls you in, if you enjoy walking into universes where power breaks its own rules and morality dissolves under pressure, then stay here. Subscribe, not as a routine click, but as a promise to keep stepping into places where the mask never really comes off, and laughter is the most dangerous sound in the room. The city doesn't notice the moment everything changes. It never does. Change here is loud, constant, and usually sponsored, wrapped in sirens, camera flashes, and carefully worded statements that promise accountability while delivering none. Tonight is no different. A police helicopter circles low over a block that's already half dead, its searchlight sliding across brick walls layered with graffiti and old bloodstains that no one ever bothered to scrub away. Somewhere below, a mugging has gone wrong, or a drug deal has soured, or a Supe has decided that tonight's frustration needs an outlet. It could be any of those things. It's always one of those things. What doesn't fit is the laughter. It comes from the mouth of an alley like something alive, high and elastic, bouncing off metal dumpsters, and fire escapes with a rhythm that doesn't match panic or pain. A group of men freeze mid-motion, one with a knife still raised, another clutching a bag that was supposed to buy him another week of staying invisible. They look at each other confused because this isn't how fear usually sounds. Fear screams. Fear begs. Fear runs. This sound enjoys itself. Then he steps into the light. At first glance, there's nothing impressive about him. No glowing eyes, no armored suit, no symbol designed by a marketing department to sell action figures. He's wearing a bright green face that shouldn't exist in this city, a color too loud, too clean, stretched into a grin that ignores the tension thickening the air. His yellow zoot suit is spotless, untouched by the grime that coats everything else here, like reality itself has politely decided not to stain him. He looks like a bad joke that wandered into the wrong genre. The men hesitate, instincts colliding. This isn't a Supe they recognize. There's no brand to fear, no dossier to recall. One of them laughs nervously, the sound brittle and short-lived, and tells the stranger to get lost. The knife wavers. The moment stretches. The mask tilts his head, as if listening to music no one else can hear, and then he snaps his fingers. The world obeys in ways it shouldn't. The knife bends like rubber, twisting into a balloon animal that squeaks when its owner squeezes it in disbelief. A dumpster slams shut on its own, teeth of rusted metal clamping together with cartoon exaggeration. Gravity hesitates, stutters, and then gives up entirely as one man lifts off the ground, legs pedaling uselessly in the air. The alley fills with screams now, real ones, the kind everyone recognizes, but they don't last long. Violence follows, but it doesn't follow rules. Punches land with the sound of cymbals crashing. Bones stretch instead of breaking, faces distort and snap back like elastic toys. Blood appears and disappears depending on whether it makes the moment funnier. The mask dances through it all, hat tipping, shoes sliding across concrete that ripples like water beneath his feet. There's no anger in his movements, no hatred, not even malice. Just delight. pure, unfiltered delight at the chaos unfolding because he willed it so. By the time the helicopter's camera finally locks on, the alley is quiet again. The men are alive, technically, but piled together in a knot of limbs that don't quite make sense, groaning softly as if embarrassed by their own existence. The mask looks up at the spotlight, squints, and waves enthusiastically, his grin stretching wider. The feed cuts out seconds later. Across the city, people see the clip before Vought can bury it. Phones buzz. Screens light up. Comment sections explode with arguments that have no vocabulary for what they just witnessed. Some call it fake. Some call it a new Supes stunt. Some laugh because it looks funny when it's not happening to you. Others feel a crawling unease they can't name because something about it doesn't fit the familiar pattern of cruelty they've learned to survive. In a penthouse office wrapped in glass and steel, executives replay the footage in silence. They slow it down, zoom in, run recognition software that returns nothing. No known abilities, no energy signatures that match existing profiles. The man in the mask breaks physics the way a child breaks toys, not out of rage but curiosity. Someone asks what department handles this. Someone else asks if they can own it. No one has a good answer. On the street, Supes hear whispers. Jokes turn sharp. A train's speed means nothing if the road decides to loop in on itself. Invulnerability means nothing if pain becomes optional. For the first time in a long while, something in this city isn't afraid of them, and worse, doesn't care enough to pretend. Back in the alley, the mask dusts off his sleeves, hums to himself, and strolls away, leaving behind a mess no one knows how to clean. He doesn't have a plan. He doesn't have a target. He just knows this place is loud, cruel, and absurd enough to be interesting. And somewhere deep in the machinery of a world built on control, a very small crack has opened, quietly asking a question no one is ready to answer. What happens when the joke is on everyone? By morning, the city has done what it always does best. It pretends nothing happened. The alley is cordoned off with yellow tape and corporate apologies, scrubbed clean enough for cameras but not enough to fool anyone who lives nearby. Official statements blame an unregistered Supe with reality-warping tendencies, as if attaching a clinical phrase can cage what people saw with their own eyes. The clip keeps resurfacing anyway, mirrored and reposted faster than Vaught's legal teams can chase it down. Laughter becomes the most unsettling part of the commentary. People aren't just afraid. Some of them are entertained. The mask spends the morning exploring. He wanders through convenience stores without paying, pulling endless chains of sausages from behind a clerk's ear, turning a slushy machine into a geyser of neon ice that spells his name in midair before collapsing into a sticky mess. He strolls across traffic, flattening himself under a bus and popping back into shape on the other side, waving cheerfully at drivers who slam their brakes and scream. Reality bends around him like a willing accomplice, and the city, so used to being abused by forces that at least pretend to be rules-bound, doesn't know how to respond to something that treats it all like a stage. Someone films him outside a bank, not robbing it, improving it. The vault door becomes a revolving door. Security guards fire weapons that turn into flagpoles with little bang signs fluttering from the barrels. The mask moonwalks out with nothing but a lollipop, tipping his hat to the cameras. The footage goes viral before he's a block away. Vaught's response escalates. They don't send Homelander. Not yet. There's a careful calculus to panic, and this doesn't feel like a threat in the way they understand threats. This feels unpredictable. Instead, they send a team. Mid-tier Supes, branded but expendable, the kind whose powers look impressive on posters and falter under pressure. They find him in a public park, sitting cross-legged on a fountain, feeding pigeons that keep turning into bowling balls and back again when they hit the ground. The confrontation lasts less than 2 minutes. Fire doesn't burn him, it tickles. Strength doesn't overpower him, it amuses him. A sonic scream turns into a jazz riff that makes his feet tap involuntarily. One Supe charges, invulnerable skin gleaming, and the mask opens a door in his chest, steps through him like a hallway and closes it behind him without leaving a mark. The man collapses, unharmed and sobbing, convinced he's missing something vital even though every scan will later insist he is. The mask claps, the pigeons applaud. Bystanders scatter, some laughing hysterically, some praying, some frozen in place because their brains can't process what they're seeing. This isn't the familiar brutality of Supes losing control. There's no collateral massacre, no accidental children crushed under rubble. It's chaos without consequence, and that paradox unsettles people more deeply than blood ever did. Violence with rules, even cruel ones, can be understood. This cannot. By the time Homelander finally arrives, the park is empty except for torn grass, cracked stone, and a single balloon tied to the fountain, bobbing gently in the breeze. He stands there longer than anyone expects, jaw tight, smile absent. His reflection in the water looks wrong somehow, less certain. He can hear the mask's laughter still echoing in his head, even though there's no one there. Elsewhere, in places far from cameras and brand managers, something else stirs. The Seven aren't the only ones paying attention. Underground message boards light up with speculation that's half joke, half desperation. Is he a god? A demon? A glitch? People who have lived under the casual tyranny of Supes for years start asking a dangerous question. What if something stronger exists that doesn't care about VOT or ratings or public approval? What if it's funny? The mask doesn't see any of this. He's busy discovering television. He slips into a studio mid-broadcast, replacing the host with himself without anyone noticing until it's too late. He reads the teleprompter, then pulls it out of the camera and eats it. He interviews a terrified guest by pulling their thoughts out as literal speech bubbles and rearranging the words until they confess things they didn't know they felt. When security rushes in, he's already gone, leaving behind a laugh track that won't stop playing even after the building is evacuated. Late in the afternoon, he pauses atop a skyscraper, legs dangling over the edge. The city stretches beneath him, a maze of power and fear and desperate attempts at order. He peers down, squints and frowns for the first time since arriving, not in anger, in mild disappointment. "Oh, you guys are serious," he mutters to no one in particular. "That's no fun." For a fleeting moment, something shifts in the air around him, a tension like the world holding its breath. The idea forms, half conscious, half instinctive. If this place runs on cruelty and spectacle, then maybe the only honest response is to turn it inside out, to make its monsters ridiculous, to make its rules optional. Somewhere below, sirens wail again. Another crisis, another chance for heroes to posture and fail. The mask's grin returns, sharper now, edged with intent. He steps off the building and falls, not down, but sideways, vanishing into the city's noise and waiting chaos, leaving behind a single question that no one in power dares to say out loud. What if this is only the beginning? The first real casualties are not bodies, they are assumptions. For decades, the world has learned how to live under Supes by building a language around them. Powers are categorized, threats are ranked, collateral damage is measured, negotiated, monetized. Even terror has been systematized, shaped into something survivable by repetition. You learn which capes to avoid, which neighborhoods go dark when certain names trend, which apologies mean nothing will change. Control exists not because Supes are controllable, but because they are predictable enough to manage. The mask breaks that language apart without effort. VOT's internal crisis meetings stretch late into the night, their polished conference rooms filled with people who have spent their careers turning chaos into quarterly projections. They argue about optics, about whether laughter makes this easier or harder to spin. Someone insists that if they can just get him on camera long enough, frame him correctly, they can turn him into a brand. Another voice, quieter, asks how you monetize something that doesn't want to win, conquer, or dominate. Something that doesn't even seem to want anything at all. Homelander listens without speaking, his expression carefully neutral. He replays the park footage again and again in his head, the way the other Supes crumpled not from pain but confusion. Power is supposed to enforce reality, not mock it. He feels an unfamiliar pressure in his chest, not fear exactly, but the sensation of standing on a stage where the spotlight has started to drift away. On the streets, reactions fracture along fault lines no one knew existed. Some people begin leaving offerings in alleys where the mask has appeared, half-joking shrines made of candy, balloons, and cheap green plastic masks bought in bulk online. Others spray paint warnings, crude caricatures depicting him as a demon, a trickster god, a harbinger. Priests argue on late-night talk shows about whether chaos without cruelty is still evil. Psychologists speculate about mass hysteria, while quietly admitting they have no framework for this kind of phenomenon. Then the copycats start. Not imitations of power, but of attitude. Ordinary people push back in small, reckless ways, emboldened by the idea that the rules might be negotiable. A protest turns absurd, demonstrators showing up dressed as cartoon characters, mocking riot police who don't know whether to respond with force or retreat. A corrupt landlord finds his car wrapped overnight in layers of papier-mâché shaped like a smiling face, impossible to remove without destroying the vehicle. Laughter spreads, brittle and desperate, because for once, mockery flows upward instead of down. Vought responds by tightening control. They deploy media pressure, smear campaigns framing the mask as an existential threat whose humor-based reality distortion could destabilize infrastructure. They leak false reports of deaths that never happened, hoping fear will do what understanding cannot. It works on some. Others notice the pattern, the familiar escalation of lies, and something sour twists in their gut. The mask, meanwhile, grows curious. He wanders into places Supes rarely bother with anymore. Soup kitchens, overcrowded shelters, a crumbling apartment block slated for demolition where families still live because nowhere else will take them. He doesn't fix anything. He doesn't rebuild. He listens, head cocked, grins softening as stories spill out of people who have spent years being invisible. When one woman breaks down describing how a soup leveled her building and received a hero's parade for it, the mask reaches into his own chest and pulls out a heart-shaped alarm clock, winding it slowly before placing it in her hands. "Wake-up calls are tricky," he says gently. "They never ring when you want them to." Word spreads quietly through these communities. Not hope, exactly. Something stranger. The idea that there is now a variable in the equation no one controls, that the script might glitch if pushed hard enough. This terrifies the people who benefit most from the existing order. The first serious attempt to stop him comes at dusk, orchestrated with enough force to make a statement. Military-grade hardware. Specialized Supes. A cordon district cleared of civilians under the pretense of a gas leak. They corner him in an abandoned industrial zone, rusted pipes and skeletal warehouses framing the scene like a set built for a final showdown. The mask looks around, impressed. "Ooh," he says, clapping his hands. "Big budget." The attack is immediate and overwhelming. Energy blasts, kinetic shockwaves, containment fields designed to lock down spatial anomalies. For a moment it looks like it might work. The air hardens. Space folds inward. The mask is pinned, his grin flickering like a bad signal. Then he sighs. The containment field turns into a birdcage. The energy blasts become fireworks that spell out insulting limericks midair. The ground liquefies, swallowing armored vehicles up to their turrets before spitting them back out wrapped in gift bows. Supes scream as their powers slip sideways, doing things they never trained for, exposing fears they've buried under branding and bravado. One of them begs. The mask pauses, genuinely surprised. He leans in close, tilting his head, eyes wide behind the frozen smile. "Oh, buddy," he says softly, "you brought a rulebook to a punchline." The zone falls silent except for crackling flames and distant sirens that never arrive. Above it all, the sky darkens, heavy with the sense that something fundamental has shifted. For the first time since Supes took over the world's nightmares, force has failed without being outmatched. And somewhere in the wreckage, As the mask strolls away humming a tune no one recognizes, the people who run this world begin to understand that containment is no longer the question. Meaning is. The aftermath doesn't explode, it seeps. Official channels go quiet for hours after the industrial zone incident, long enough for rumors to metastasize into something more corrosive than panic. Leaked audio circulates first, distorted screams and overlapping shouts, Supes yelling commands that dissolve into confusion. Then still images appear, pulled from drones that shouldn't have survived, showing armored vehicles gift-wrapped like children's toys, containment pylons bent into balloon animals, men and women in branded suits staring at their own hands as if betrayed by them. Vought denies everything, but denial has lost its rhythm. People recognize the pause now, the silence before the spin. In private, the cracks widen. Supes argue with handlers in voices that shake despite themselves. Power feels different after the mask touches it, not diminished, but unreliable, like a familiar limb that suddenly refuses to obey. Some refuse deployment orders outright. Others overcompensate, lashing out with renewed brutality in unrelated incidents, desperate to reassert dominance over a world that no longer feels scripted for their benefit. Each overreaction feeds the sense that something is unraveling. Homelander watches it all from above, hovering unseen over the city as night settles in layers of neon and shadow. He listens to police scanners, to emergency channels buzzing with half-formed reports, and feels the quiet hum of adoration he's relied on for years thinning into static. When people look up now, they're not always looking for him. Sometimes they're laughing. Sometimes they're waiting for something else. That realization cuts deeper than any weapon ever could. The mask appears again without announcement, this time somewhere that cameras rarely linger for long. A hospital wing sealed off after a soup-related training accident, its corridors still smelling of antiseptic and scorched plastic. He walks past shattered equipment and beds that were never filled again, his footsteps echoing softly. A nurse freezes when she sees him, hand tightening around a clipboard like it might anchor her to reality. He tips his hat. "No autographs," he whispers conspiratorially, then presses a finger to the wall. The scorch marks ripple, rearranging themselves into crude drawings of what happened there, played back like a flipbook of careless destruction and quiet suffering. The nurse covers her mouth, tears welling not because it's funny but because it's true. The mask doesn't laugh this time. He simply nods as if acknowledging a shared secret and walks on. This is the part that unsettles people most. Not the chaos, not the physics-defying violence, but the way he drifts between comedy and clarity without warning. One moment he's a joke made flesh. The next he's holding a mirror up to things everyone has learned not to see too clearly. He doesn't punish cruelty with justice. He reframes it, strips away its authority, makes it ridiculous or unbearable depending on what the moment seems to require. Online, the arguments sharpen. Some call him a necessary correction, an answer to unchecked power that finally feels honest. Others warn that meaninglessness is worse than tyranny, that a world where nothing matters except the laugh of an immortal trickster is not freedom, but annihilation. Both sides miss something important. The mask isn't trying to replace the system. He's exposing how fragile it always was. Late one night, Vought makes its boldest move yet. They don't announce it. They don't leak it. They simply clear a rooftop and wait. Homelander descends alone, cape settling behind him like a deliberate echo of divinity. For the first time since this began, there are no cameras, no audience to shape the moment. Just two figures and a city holding its breath. The mask is already there, sitting on the edge, feet swinging, humming tunelessly. They regard each other in silence. Homelander speaks first, voice controlled, calm in the way only absolute power can afford to be. He asks what the mask wants: fame, influence, control, something to anchor this to a familiar narrative where deals can be struck and hierarchies preserved. The mask bursts out laughing, the sound sharp enough to make Homelander flinch despite himself. "Oh wow," he says, wiping an imaginary tear from his eye. "You really don't get it." He hops to his feet and circles Homelander, peering at him from different angles, tugging at the edge of his cape like a curious child testing fabric. With each step, Homelander feels something shift, not in his body, but in the way the moment frames him. The certainty that has always wrapped around him like armor starts to feel thin. "You're not the problem," the mask continues lightly. "You're the punchline that forgot it was written." Homelander's jaw tightens. He takes a step forward, and the air vibrates with restrained force. For a fraction of a second, it looks like this might finally turn violent in a way the world understands. The mask leans in close, grin unwavering. "You hurt people because it works," he says, voice dropping just enough to matter. "I hurt ideas because they don't." Something in Homelander's eyes flickers. Rage, confusion, a spark of something like doubt. It's gone an instant later, buried under fury, but it's enough. Enough for the mask to step back, tip his hat, and step sideways out of existence as if the rooftop were a stage, and he'd reached the end of his scene. Homelander stands alone, fists clenched, the city sprawling beneath him, louder and quieter all at once. For the first time, he isn't sure who won. Far below, ordinary people feel it too. A shift, subtle but undeniable. Not hope, not salvation. Just the knowledge that the rules they've lived under are no longer sacred and that someone somewhere is willing to laugh at the monsters who insisted they were. The mask reappears in the crowd an hour later, blending in, face still frozen in that impossible smile. He listens to the city breathe, to fear and awe and anger tangled together, and considers his next move. The joke, after all, only works if you keep telling it. Power hates being laughed at, but it hates being ignored even more. In the days that follow the rooftop encounter, the world enters an uneasy pause, the kind that settles in after an earthquake when no one is sure whether the ground is done moving. Supes still patrol. Vought still issue statements. Markets open and close on schedule. On the surface, order remains intact. Beneath it, something has shifted its weight, and everyone can feel the pressure in their bones. The mask does not appear for a while. This absence becomes its own kind of presence. Sightings dry up. No new clips surface. No laughing echoes bounce through alleys or parks. The silence is interpreted in 100 different ways depending on who's listening. Some claim he was driven off, scared away by real power at last. Others insist he's regrouping, planning something catastrophic. A few quieter voices wonder if the joke is over, if it was always meant to be a brief, impossible interruption before things snapped back into place. The Supes hope for that outcome more than they admit. They return to old habits with exaggerated intensity, overperforming heroics for cameras, escalating force in situations that don't require it. Crime statistics dip briefly, not because things are safer, but because everyone is bracing for the next unpredictable variable. Fear becomes conservative. Risk aversion masquerades as stability. Homelander feels the absence like an itch under the skin. He keeps expecting that laughter, that sideways pressure on reality, but it never comes. Instead, he finds himself replaying the words spoken on the rooftop, not because they make sense, but because they don't. A punchline that forgot it was written. The phrase gnaws at him, undermining the certainty he's built his identity on. He doubles down on control, because control is what he understands, and understanding is safety. Vought strategists, less emotional but no less afraid, begin to reassess everything. They commission new models, new think tanks, new experts pulled from fields that have nothing to do with Supes. Comedians, philosophers, cultural theorists, anyone who might help them predict a force that doesn't want what power usually wants. The reports are incoherent, contradictory, filled with words like absurdism and liminality that offer no actionable countermeasures. One internal memo circulates briefly before being buried, posing a question no one wants to answer out loud. What if the mask isn't escalating because he doesn't need to? What if the damage is already done? On the streets, people adjust in smaller, stranger ways. Jokes become sharper, more pointed. Protest signs turn surreal, mocking rather than demanding. Graffiti shifts tone, less about rage and more about ridicule. Someone paints a massive smiling face on a courthouse wall overnight, its eyes hollow, its grin stretched wide enough to swallow the building's authority. It's removed within hours, but the image lingers, shared and reshared, dissected endlessly. Laughter becomes a weapon people aren't sure how to wield. Then the mask returns quietly. No spectacle, no explosions. Just a man sitting on a subway platform at 3 in the morning, legs crossed, humming as a train screeches to a halt. A handful of commuters freeze when they recognize him, hearts racing, waiting for reality to unravel. It doesn't. He tips his hat to a janitor, helps an exhausted woman gather spilled papers by turning them into obedient origami birds, and boards the train like a normal passenger. The ride is uneventful until it is. At the next stop, a pair of Supes enter, mid-tier enforcers on an unscheduled inspection, their presence heavy with implied violence. They scan the car, eyes hard, fingers flexing, ready to remind everyone who owns this space. Their gaze lands on the mask, and for a moment no one breathes. He looks up from a newspaper that reads tomorrow's date. "Oh," he says pleasantly, "you guys look tense." They don't attack, not immediately. The rules are unclear here, public space, witnesses, no directive from above. That hesitation is all the mask needs. He stands, stretches, and the train lurches, not forward but inward, compressing the moment like a held note. The Supes feel their authority sag, not stripped away, but inflated until it becomes ridiculous. Their uniforms puff up like parade floats. Their voices boom comically when they try to issue commands, echoing back at them with exaggerated authority until the words lose meaning. Passengers stare, some laughing despite themselves, others covering their mouths in terror. The mask doesn't hurt anyone. He doesn't even leave a mess. When the doors open again, the Supes stumble out, deflated, humiliated, stripped of the quiet menace they rely on to function. The train pulls away. Reality exhales. News of the incident spreads slowly, then all at once, harder to suppress because it doesn't fit the narrative of threat escalation. No casualties, no destruction, just power made absurd in a space everyone understands. It's the first time many people see Supes diminished without being replaced by something worse. That's when the cult forms. Not officially, not with robes or chants. It starts as jokes, usernames, shared references. People begin greeting each other with exaggerated politeness, tipping imaginary hats. Memes proliferate, but beneath the humor is something earnest and dangerous. A growing belief that ridicule might be safer than resistance, that laughter could carve out space where obedience once ruled. The mask notices, and for the first time he hesitates. He watches from the margins as people project meaning onto him, as symbols accrete around his grin. He pokes at one impromptu gathering in a park, deflating the seriousness by turning a would-be speech into a pie fight that leaves everyone laughing and confused. He doesn't want followers. He doesn't want doctrine. But intent, he's learning, doesn't matter once an idea starts moving on its own. That night, alone on a rooftop far from cameras, the mask stares out at the city and frowns again, the expression fleeting but real. Jokes are easy, consequences are not. And somewhere in the sprawl below, something darker than corporate control or celebrity tyranny stirs, drawn not to power, but to the chaos of belief itself. Belief has weight, even when it pretends to be light. The city doesn't name what's happening, but it responds to it all the same. Crowds linger longer at intersections where laughter once broke the tension. Cameras tilt instinctively toward empty spaces, as if expecting the grin to step back into frame. People begin performing for one another in small, defiant ways, mocking authority before it can assert itself. A woman bows theatrically to a Supe blocking a sidewalk. A group of teenagers mime applause when a patrol passes. The gestures are harmless, almost childish, but they carry an undercurrent that makes handlers uneasy. Vought notices patterns where others see jokes. They start pulling data on social behavior, tracking humor the way they once tracked crime spikes. What emerges is not a movement with leaders or demands, but a mood, an erosion of reverence, a willingness to laugh at figures who once commanded silence. This terrifies the architects of control far more than riots ever did. Fear can be met with force. Mockery slides around it. The mask watches from a distance, unsettled in a way he hasn't been before. He didn't come here to be a symbol. Symbols calcify. They harden into things that demand defense. He thrives in the spaces between meaning, in moments that slip away before they can be claimed. Seeing people organize around his absence feels wrong, like a joke being explained until it dies. He intervenes clumsily at first, appearing in places where gatherings threaten to turn earnest. A street meeting dissolves into slapstick when he replaces protest signs with rubber chickens. An online manifesto glitches into a looping clip of him shushing the camera. He wants to loosen the grip forming around his image, to remind people that this was never about salvation. But belief is stubborn. Some laugh harder, convinced this is all part of the act. Others interpret his disruptions as tests, deeper layers of irony they're meant to understand. Meaning multiplies faster than he can undercut it, and for the first time, the mask feels something like responsibility pressing in. That's when the other thing finds its opening. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't laugh. It slips into the gaps left by destabilized authority, feeding on the confusion that follows when old fears lose their shape. Reports come in of rituals gone wrong, of people vanishing after chasing the thrill of forbidden jokes taken too seriously. Symbols start appearing that don't belong to the mask's vocabulary, sharp where he is round, earnest where he is flippant. Whispers circulate about something watching from behind the laughter. Vought, desperate for leverage, latches onto these rumors with grim relief. A new threat means a familiar playbook. They spin the narrative quickly, drawing lines between the mask's antics and these darker incidents, warning that chaos invites monsters. The implication is clear. Order, however cruel, is safer than laughter without limits. The mask hears this argument echoed in frightened voices on the street, and it hits closer than he expects. He never wanted to open doors for something worse. He wanted to kick dents in the walls of a cage and see what people did with the space. One night he follows the trail. It leads him beneath the city, into tunnels that predate modern infrastructure, places where forgotten things collect. The air grows heavy. The humor drains from the space like color leached from an old photograph. Symbols pulse faintly on damp stone, wrong in a way that has nothing to do with physics and everything to do with intent. The mask slows. For the first time since arriving in this world, he feels resistance that isn't amused by him. The air doesn't bend eagerly. It pushes back. Laughter echoes strangely here, swallowed rather than amplified. He presses forward anyway, curiosity tempered by a rare flicker of caution. At the heart of it, he finds not a creature but people. A small group, eyes hollow, mouths moving in rehearsed fervor, trying to summon meaning from disorder. They look up at him with awe and terror tangled together, mistaking his grin for approval. "You made it possible," one of them whispers. "You showed us the rules aren't real." The mask's smile falters. He wants to explain the difference between breaking rules and abandoning them entirely, between play and surrender. He wants to tell them that laughter without compassion curdles into cruelty just as easily as power does. But explanations aren't his strength. They never have been. Instead, he snaps his fingers. The symbols dissolve, not explosively but gently, like chalk washed away by rain. The air lightens. The pressure recedes. The people collapse into confusion and relief, their borrowed conviction draining out of them as quickly as it formed. The mask doesn't punish them. He doesn't lecture. He just looks tired. When he leaves the tunnels, dawn is breaking, painting the city in soft, forgiving light that will be gone in minutes. He stands on a bridge and watches traffic crawl, thinking about jokes and consequences, about how easily disruption becomes doctrine. Behind him, sirens begin to wail again. Vought has mobilized. Supes are moving with purpose, armed with a narrative that paints him as the gateway to something truly monstrous. They will come for him harder now, with less hesitation, convinced that containment is once again a moral imperative. The mask straightens, adjusts his hat, and forces the grin back into place. If this world insists on turning everything into a story with villains and heroes, then maybe it's time to change the genre. He steps off the bridge, not falling, not flying, but vanishing into the thin space between one laugh and the next, already plotting how to make the coming collision as revealing as possible. Because if belief is inevitable, then the only honest move left is to test what people choose to believe when the joke stops being funny. The city braces the way a body does before impact, muscles tightening around habits it no longer trusts. Vaught's message is everywhere now, saturating screens and streets with a familiar cadence of urgency and reassurance. Experts warn that chaos breeds worse evils. Anchors speak gravely about responsibility. Supes appear in coordinated patrols, their movements deliberate, their presence meant to feel like protection rather than occupation. The narrative is clear and comforting in its simplicity. There was a disturbance. It invited danger. Order must be restored. People listen, people doubt. Many do both at once. The mask watches this shift with a stillness that surprises even him. He has always thrived in motion, in reaction, in the joy of spontaneous disruption. Now the world is moving without him, and it's doing so in a way that feels uncomfortably purposeful. The laughter has thinned, replaced by arguments, by fear sharpened into moral certainty. The space he opened is being claimed, not by freedom, but by something older and more rigid. He decides to step into the story they're telling. Not to deny it, to stress it. His next appearance is impossible to ignore. He materializes in the middle of a televised town hall, one designed to reassure a shaken public, hosted by a well-loved Supe whose power is empathy packaged for prime time. The audience gasps as he takes a seat among them, crossing his legs politely, hands folded in his lap like a model citizen. "Don't stop on my account," he says cheerfully. "I love civic engagement." The host freezes, smile locked in place by years of training. Security moves, hesitates, stops. The mask hasn't done anything yet, and that uncertainty paralyzes the room more effectively than violence ever could. Cameras roll. Millions watch in real time. The host asks the question everyone wants answered, voice trembling just enough to feel authentic. "Why are you doing this? What do you want?" The mask considers it. For once, he doesn't rush the moment. He looks out at the audience, at faces caught between fascination and dread, at people desperate for meaning that doesn't hurt. "I wanted to see what you'd do," he says finally. "Turns out you really like being told who the bad guy is." A ripple of discomfort moves through the crowd. He gestures and the set changes, not dramatically, just subtly. The patriotic backdrops warp into caricatures of themselves, eagles stretching into absurd proportions, flags flapping like cheap props. The host's words echo back with a slight delay, turning reassurance into farce without altering a single syllable. "This is how it works," the mask continues. "You get scared, someone points, you clap, you stop asking questions." The feed cuts. Vought spins it as an attack, as psychological warfare. They circulate stills of the warped set, calling it proof of destabilization, of reality under threat. They don't air the words. Words are harder to control once released. Instead, they accelerate plans that were always waiting for an excuse. Containment becomes policy. Supes are authorized broader latitude. Surveillance expands. Protest is reframed as potential collaboration with chaos. People who laughed a week ago now glance over their shoulders before smiling at the wrong moment. Fear reasserts itself, heavier for having been briefly lifted. The mask feels the weight of that shift acutely. He didn't mean to hand them a weapon this sharp. He wanted to expose the mechanism, not reinforce it. But systems are resilient. They bend, absorb critique, and emerge harder. Late that night, he visits a place that hasn't been on camera in years. A training facility buried deep beneath layers of concrete and deniability, where Supes are broken and rebuilt when branding fails. He walks its halls unseen, watching drills designed to strip hesitation, to replace doubt with reflex. These are not villains. They are products. The realization doesn't make the place easier to stomach. A young Supe falters mid-exercise, breath hitching, eyes darting as if he can feel something watching him. The mask appears beside him, offering a handkerchief. "Nerves?" he asks gently. The Supe nods, ashamed. "They say if we don't stop you, everything falls apart." The mask studies him, the grin softening at the edges. "Funny thing about falling apart," he says. "Sometimes that's just what happens when something was glued together wrong." Alarms blare. Someone has noticed. The mask steps back, letting the handkerchief turn into a paper bird that flutters weakly before dissolving. He disappears as guards flood the room, leaving behind nothing but doubt and a question the young Supe will never quite shake. As dawn approaches, the mask stands atop a broadcast tower, city spread beneath him like a map of competing stories. He understands now that he can't simply disrupt and vanish. This world will always fill the void with something worse if given the chance. If the story insists on a climax, then he will give it one. Not with destruction, with choice. The choice does not arrive wrapped in spectacle. It comes quietly, almost politely, the way truths do when they no longer need to shout. The mask spends the next day doing nothing remarkable. He doesn't appear on screens. He doesn't bend physics. He walks. He listens. He sits in diners and parks and half-empty buses, absorbing the mood of a city that has learned to brace for punishment. People argue in low voices about safety and freedom, about whether laughter was a luxury they could no longer afford. A man at a counter says order is worth any price. A woman 2 stools down says order has always been the most expensive thing they've ever bought. No one notices the green-faced stranger sipping coffee and nodding along. By evening, the city feels coiled tight enough to snap. Vought makes its move. They announce a live demonstration framed as reassurance, a controlled engagement, proof that the threat has been neutralized. Supes gather in formation at a downtown plaza, floodlights washing the space in harsh white clarity. Drones hover overhead. Barriers go up. Civilians are invited to watch from a distance, close enough to feel included, far enough to feel powerless. The message is unmistakable. This ends on their terms. The mask steps into the light without fanfare. No fireworks, no distortion. He simply walks into the plaza, hands in his pockets, grin fixed in place. A murmur ripples through the crowd, fear and anticipation tangling together. Supes tense, powers primed, waiting for the signal that will justify everything they're about to do. Homelander descends last, landing with practiced precision. He surveys the scene, the cameras, the crowd, and finally the mask. This is the ending he understands. A showdown, a victor, applause. The mask looks around, then raises a hand. "Before we do the punching thing," he says, voice carrying without amplification, "can we try something new?" No one moves. He shrugs, worth a shot. The plaza changes, but not the way people expect. The lights dim, softening, shadows lengthening. The Supes feel their powers settle into a strange neutrality, not gone but muted, waiting. The crowd feels it too, a gentle pressure like being asked to pay attention. "This is the part where I usually make the bad guys look silly," the mask continues. "But you've already got that covered." A ripple of uneasy laughter spreads, quickly stifled. "So here's the deal," he says, spreading his hands. "I'm not going to break anything. I'm not going to humiliate anyone. I'm not even going to stay." Homelander steps forward, incredulous. Then what's the point? The mask turns to him, and for the first time the grin doesn't feel like mockery. The point, he says softly, is to see what happens when I stop. He snaps his fingers. Nothing happens. No distortion, no chaos, no punchline. The plaza remains a plaza. The Supes remain armed and powerful. The crowd remains afraid. The cameras keep rolling. The absence hits harder than any spectacle ever could. For a long, unbearable moment, the world waits for permission. The mask steps back. I opened a door, he says, voice quieter now. You all ran toward it or away from it or tried to board it up. That part's on you. What comes next is too. He tips his hat, and this time there's no trick in it, just a gesture. Then he vanishes, not in a flash, not with a laugh, just gone like a thought you lose mid-sentence. The silence that follows is devastating. All eyes turn to the Supes, to Homelander, to the people who have always filled this role. There is no villain to fight, no reality to bend, no excuse left. The cameras keep watching. The crowd holds its breath. Homelander feels it then, the full weight of the moment. Power without narrative. Strength without an audience primed to cheer. He could act. He could declare victory. He could remind everyone why they fear him. He hesitates. That hesitation is everything. Someone in the crowd laughs, sharp and nervous. Someone else joins in. It's not joyful. It's not brave. It's human, cracking through the tension like ice underfoot. A chant tries to form and fails. People start talking to each other instead of watching the stage. Order doesn't collapse, but it wobbles. Vought scrambles to cut the feed to reclaim the story, but the damage is already done. Not because the mask destroyed anything, but because he left the question unanswered. He didn't replace one tyranny with another. He didn't crown himself savior or demon. He stepped aside. Later, in quieter corners of the city, people will argue about what it meant. Some will say he was a coward. Others will say he was merciful. A few will understand that the most dangerous thing he ever did was trust them with the aftermath. Far away, somewhere beyond cameras and consequence, the mask watches the ripples spread and finally allows the grin to fade. Jokes he's learned are easy. Walking away is not. And as the city stumbles forward without a punchline to guide it, one final truth settles in. The joke was never about him. It was about what everyone else chose to do when he stopped laughing. The city does not collapse after the mask disappears. That is the lie everyone expects, the catastrophe Vought prepares statements for and Supes rehearse responses to. But collapse is loud, obvious, cinematic. What follows instead is quieter, slower, and far more difficult to contain. People wake up the next morning with the same routines waiting for them. Trains still run. Stores still open. Screens still glow with curated outrage and reassurance. On the surface, normality holds. Beneath it, something has loosened. A tension that once pulled everyone in the same direction now fraying into individual threads. Without the mask, fear returns, but it returns altered. It no longer points cleanly upward at Supes or outward at chaos. It turns inward toward uncertainty. People begin noticing the pauses they never questioned before. The way a Supe waits for applause before acting. The way official narratives arrive prepackaged, answers included. The way laughter, once spontaneous, has been trained out of public spaces like a bad habit. Vought tries to reclaim momentum. They declare the crisis resolved, crediting decisive leadership and heroic restraint. Homelander appears on screens again, calm and authoritative, assuring viewers that order has been preserved. His words land, but they don't anchor the way they used to. Something essential is missing, not the mask himself, but the contrast he provided. Without the joke, the performance looks thinner, more fragile. On the streets, conversations change tone. People don't speak louder, they speak sideways. Sarcasm sharpens. Jokes become coded, layered with meaning that slips past surveillance and polite company. A cashier asks if a customer wants a receipt and adds deadpan for your protection. The customer smiles not because it's funny, but because it's understood. Supes feel it too. Patrols become more aggressive in places where mockery lingers, more hesitant where crowds simply watch in silence. Power depends on reaction, and reaction has become unpredictable. A show of force might provoke fear, or it might provoke laughter, or worse, indifference. Handlers issue new guidelines about optics, about de-escalation, about avoiding moments that can be misinterpreted. No one quite knows what misinterpretation means anymore. Homelander feels the absence most acutely in the air itself. He still hears admiration, still senses awe, but threaded through it now is something else, faint but persistent: appraisal, evaluation, as if people are no longer assuming his inevitability but testing it quietly in their minds. He tells himself it's nothing. He tells himself this is victory. Elsewhere, smaller stories unfold without cameras. A neighborhood refuses to disperse when ordered, not shouting, not resisting, simply continuing a block party until the patrol gives up and leaves. A whistleblower leaks documents with jokes embedded in the margins, ridicule disguised as annotation. A late-night host risks cancellation by saying nothing at all for a full minute, staring into the camera until the audience grows uncomfortable, then thanking them for their patience. The absence of spectacle becomes its own kind of spectacle. Vought convenes emergency think tanks again, but this time the numbers don't add up. Fear isn't spiking the way it should. Compliance hasn't dropped enough to justify open crackdowns. The public mood is diffuse, resistant to categorization. The mask didn't inspire rebellion. He inspired skepticism, which is harder to fight. In a forgotten corner of the city, in a bar no one bothers to renovate anymore, an old television flickers with reruns of past heroics. A group of patrons watches in silence, scenes of destruction framed as triumph. Someone laughs at the wrong moment, then stops, unsettled by their own reaction. Another person raises a glass and says, quietly, "Guess it wasn't that funny after all." No one argues. Far away, unseen, the mask watches none of this directly. He doesn't need to. The joke has escaped him now, moving on its own momentum. That was always the risk. You introduce absurdity into a rigid system, and eventually it starts asking questions you can't answer with a punchline. He stands in a place between places, reality thin and flexible, considering whether this world will find something better or simply reinvent the same cruelty with a different tone. He knows he could go back. He knows he could escalate, tear away the last illusions, force clarity through catastrophe. He doesn't, because forcing meaning is just another kind of tyranny. The city stumbles forward, uncertain, uncomfortable, alive in ways it hasn't been in years. And somewhere in that uneasy motion, a fragile possibility takes shape. Not hope, not freedom, but awareness. The mask smiles faintly, for the first time without performance. One chapter remains unwritten. Awareness is not a victory. It doesn't arrive with applause or banners or a sense of completion. It lingers instead, like a bruise you keep pressing just to confirm it's still there. In the weeks that follow, the world does not become kinder. It becomes harder to lie to. Vought adapts because it always does. New branding emerges, softer language wrapped around the same structures. Supes are encouraged to appear more relatable, to smile less perfectly, to show controlled vulnerability. Interviews are staged where heroes admit to mistakes that never quite reach the truth. The machinery learns, incorporating irony as a feature rather than a flaw. If laughter can't be crushed, it can at least be monetized. But something refuses to fit. People don't respond the way they used to. The smiles feel rehearsed now, the confessions calculated. Where once there was passive consumption, there is comparison. People remember the silence in the plaza, the moment when nothing happened and it mattered more than any explosion. They measure new narratives against that absence and find them wanting. Supes feel it when they land in public spaces. The crowds are still there, still taking pictures, still cheering, but the timing is off. The pauses are longer. The applause comes later, sometimes not at all. Power that relies on anticipation struggles when anticipation turns into assessment. Homelander stands before a mirror in a private penthouse, adjusting his posture, his expression, trying to recover the effortless certainty he once wore like skin. It still looks right. That's the problem. Looking right is no longer enough. He remembers the rooftop, the plaza, the grin that wasn't afraid of him. For the first time, he wonders what would happen if he stopped performing altogether. The thought terrifies him more than the mask ever did. Performance, after all, is structure. Without it, there's only the question of who he is when no one is watching. Across the city, smaller shifts continue. A courtroom erupts into laughter when a Supes testimony contradicts footage everyone has already seen. The judge bangs a gavel, furious, but the sound doesn't command silence the way it once did. A school lesson on heroism derails when a student asks whether being powerful and being good are the same thing. The teacher doesn't have an answer prepared. None of this is revolution. There are no burning barricades, no triumphant marches, just friction. Constant, grinding friction between what people are told and what they've learned to notice. Somewhere far from the city, in a space that doesn't map cleanly onto geography, the mask watches the ripples fade into complexity. He feels the familiar itch to intervene, to sharpen the edges, to give the story a cleaner ending. But clean endings are lies. They comfort the powerful and mislead everyone else. He remembers the people in the tunnels, the way belief curdled when untended. He remembers the crowd in the plaza, the unbearable weight of being asked to decide something without guidance. This world doesn't need another god or demon. It needs to sit with uncertainty long enough to develop a spine. So he stays away. That choice costs him something. He is, at his core, a creature of motion and reaction. Stillness is not his natural state, yet he endures it, watching from a distance as the joke lives on without him, mutated and imperfect, but no longer under his control. That is the price of introducing chaos without claiming ownership of the outcome. Back in the city, a mural appears overnight on a brick wall slated for demolition. It doesn't depict the mask. It shows a crowd standing before an empty stage, some laughing, some arguing, some walking away. No hero, no villain, just people deciding what to do next. It's painted over within days, but photographs circulate, not as a rallying symbol, but as a question. Months pass. The world doesn't become better in any grand, measurable way. Supes still abuse power, corporations still lie. Fear still finds new shapes to inhabit, but cracks remain where certainty once reigned. Mockery resurfaces unexpectedly. Silence is used strategically. People hesitate before cheering, before obeying, before believing. And in that hesitation, fragile as it is, something human persists. The mask feels the pull of other worlds, other stories that need disruption, other systems too confident in their own inevitability. He adjusts his hat, the grin returning, not as a weapon, but as a tool he understands how to use, and when not to. Before he leaves entirely, he spares one last glance back. The joke, he realizes, was never about laughter. It was about permission. Permission to see the machinery. Permission to question the script. Permission to imagine that even gods and monsters are, at some level, performances that can be interrupted. Whether this world uses that permission wisely is no longer his concern. He steps sideways into the thin place between moments, carrying with him the knowledge that sometimes the most radical act is not to tear a system down, but to walk away and let people notice the silence you leave behind. And somewhere, in a city that once held its breath for a punchline, someone smiles, not because it's funny, but because they finally understand why it mattered.